Good morning. Welcome to Contemporary Issues Sunday School class. We are going to talk today about Guatemala, and our class member Steve Horst recently went to Guatemala, and last fall, actually, wasn't it, Steve?
It was in February this year.
In February this year, not that long ago. Okay, and he made a presentation to our Men's Covenant group with lots of pictures, and I thought it was great. Would be a good idea for him to tell us about it, because we have other folks with connections to Guatemala here too. So we would like to hear about that.
Great. So
First, let me go ahead and make a couple announcements. Our Zoomers, welcome, and please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not talking. And we also are recording this for future playback on YouTube. And I think that's all the announcements we have for today. We want to give plenty of time. Okay, Vicky.
June 9th for the potluck fellowship. We're going to have it in the library this time, and then our food tables will be outside. So we have the area from 11:30 until 1. So just put that on your calendar.
When, no, I didn't know.
June 9th.
9, okay.
Sunday, June 9th. Okay. Very good. Okay, with that, I want to introduce Steve, and he'll tell about our other guest also.
hey, guys, thank you for being here this morning. I am really excited and proud to introduce Laura and Mike Richards from the Pura Vida organization. This is a non-government org that was started about 25 years ago. 20 years ago. And I had the pleasure of going down 2 times, one in February this year on a construction project. So it's really about education. So I'm going to let Laura talk about the org. Mike's built a presentation, and then I'm going to follow up some of the construction things and take questions and answers also.
As Steve said, my name is Laura Richards, and I am a staff member for Pura Vida, but I've been involved with them for quite a long time. I'm very thankful for you letting me come talk to you all, and my husband Mike for helping with my AV stuff here today. I appreciate him being here. As I said, I started with Pura Vida actually back in 2005. We've been longtime members of St. Luke's United Methodist Church, and St. Luke's sends teams down to Guatemala routinely. Some years we have 2 or 3 teams going down even. And so I go down at least once a year, if not multiple times a year. We're down there with teams, other than the COVID years. We had 2 years there we couldn't go down. But otherwise, we've been down there. I started off as a team member, like Steve was doing, and then I became a team leader for St. Luke's. And then I became a trip leader for Pura Vida. And then I became a staff member for Pura Vida. And now I'm almost a full-time staff member there. I'm the director of sponsor donor relations. I do it volunteer because I'm crazy, but I love it. And I love what I'm doing. I'm also on the board of directors. So this is a passion for me. So I really love what we're doing down there, and I'm excited to share it with you today.
Excellent.
So next slide.
Okay, and I'm gonna share
Oh,
screen.
no,
Not yet, not the
Just the
video,
slide.
just the slide.
Yes.
The
The slide with
PowerPoint.
the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Very good.
Right.
Bring up the
So our
PowerPoint.
Zoomers can see it too. There, can you see online now, the slides?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, so to
proceed.
the next one.
Next slide, okay?
Okay. So Guatemala there. You can't see all of it right there, but I'll tell you a little bit about Guatemala. For those of you who don't know, it's actually the first country you're going to run into if you go south through Mexico, first country you're going to move into. It's about the land size of Tennessee, as far as land size, with a population kind of getting close to Florida's population stuffed into it. So it's very dense, and you have urban populations that are very dense, and then you have communities up in the rural mountains of indigenous communities that are also kind of pocketed away, isolated communities up there. It's a beautiful area. They've got everything from beaches to forests to volcanoes, lakes, you name it, absolutely gorgeous country. But they do have a lot of challenges, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you today, is some of the challenges they face. Our organization, our mission thing is over there. I'm not sure if you can see it all, but we want to go and share our resources with Guatemala in a meaningful, respectful, and long-term way. And what's important here, a couple of things. Communities. We go into communities and we work with the leaders there. We don't go in and say, we're here, we're going to build you a school. We come in and we say, what do you need? We sit down with the people that are running the communities and say, how can we help you? How can we support you? What can we do to make your lives better and help things get better for your community? We also do it in a long-term way. We've been going back there for more than 20 years, trying to see what's going on and help them. And they know we're going to be back next year. And it's not like they're never going to see us again after we do a project. Our primary focus, and Steve didn't know this
I
until
didn't know this.
today, is actually education. We want to get kids educated down there. We see that as a long-term fix or help for the country. And we want people to get down there. But we also want to support the communities in other ways. And that does with our construction trips and some of the other projects we have that Steve is going to talk about. We really want to be supportive and encouraging to them. We don't want to come in and say, this is what you need to do. We want to come in and help them, help themselves, empower them to be the change in their communities. Because I think that's where the true power comes, is if we can help them, give them a hand up instead of a handout kind of idea. And so we try to empower the people to be the change down. So the next one. The next slide, when he brings it up here, is going to be challenges. Some of the things that they're facing is challenges in Guatemala. If you aren't familiar, they had a 36-year civil war that basically went from the 60s until the mid-90s and stuff. And they are still reeling from it, especially in the real rural areas where we go. We work in villages where people were tortured and killed. They go in and kill every man in the village kind of thing. Families were living in caves that they were hiding out from the government. It was a really rough time. And so there are families that are still just trying to get back on their feet, even though it's this much time later. Obviously, very limited government funding. And when it's limited for infrastructure and basic services, if they choose between their urban areas where all of their government is situated and everything, or the little isolated communities, obviously the isolated communities do not get, if there's limited infrastructure for the regular people, really limited for the communities we work in. Unfortunately, corruption is common. If you know anything about Guatemala, this doesn't come as a shock to you. Very often they'll have money and they'll start to dole out some of it and then it'll be siphoned off other places and things. So it doesn't necessarily get to our communities. And the natural disasters hit them really hard because of the infrastructure and basic service issues. If you get something like a mudslide come through or whatever, it'll just decimate the community. And so those are issues that they're really facing. Our indigenous communities have even more problems. They have, as I said, dramatically lower support, much less access to healthcare, food, jobs, all that kind of stuff. And they're very isolated. Very often you'll see families, they don't have any electricity at all. So they were not talking about TV, no connections, no papers. They don't know a lot of what's going on in the world. And it makes it very easy to take advantage of them that way as well. Communication barriers. I was talking this morning about the fact, not only do a lot of the people we work with not speak English, they don't speak Spanish. They're speaking Quiche, which is the Mayan dialect. There's actually 22 different Mayan dialects. Most of the people in the area we are in speak Quiche, but there's lots of different dialects. And so if they don't know how to speak Spanish, they can't communicate with the government. Once again, another way that they get taken advantage of. When we have our student visits that I'll talk about later on, we have to have 2 sets of translators sometimes, because if the parents speak Quiche, and the kids can speak Spanish, and then we've got English here, it goes back and forth. It's quite a thing. Many of the people we are working with live on less than $2 a day, and they pretty much are living off of agriculture that they can grow on their own farm. And that's how they're basically subsistence agriculture is what they're getting by.
Is that what most of the country is rural agriculture?
We have about 50% that's like urban centers that you'll have big cities like Guatemala City is a huge city that's going to have McDonald's and Wendy's and all kinds of things like that. But then you'll go up into the areas we work in and there's nothing. They're just little villages as you would expect.
Okay.
So poverty. When I went down to Guatemala the first time with St. Luke's, my idea was to take my kids down because I wanted them to see poverty in the world. And I was actually blown away. I did not realize that there were people that were still living under these kind of circumstances in the world. This is Lucia. We built a house for her a couple of years back. And you can actually see hers is actually made out of wood, which at least is better. Sometimes we've been there with ones that just have plywood or even corn stalks. that they're using. And we have a video here that I think we're gonna try to play here, we're gonna try to bring up, that actually shows you the inside of her house and a little bit. It was taken right before we were building the house for her. And it shows you a little bit about how she lives and what her life is like. Bring it up.
Yep. This one, hang with me just a second.
There it is. I see it. Trying to come up there.
Lots of windows open on the,
Got a lot of-
here we go.
Sure, it's you.
Okay, hang on just a second.
I'm guessing you've been to Pandahacho
Oh, Panachal, yes, yes,
on the lake.
yes.
Yeah.
That's one.
Doug on screen on Zoom, can you hear that music? Could you hear that music, Doug? No, okay, hang on just a second, let me try and make sure that I'm sharing this properly. Hang on just a second. Let me share the sound now, we'll be able to do it. Lots of little buttons. One thing today.
Sí, gracias a Dios. Ahorita ya las gentes, las cristianas Dios que me toca su corazón, que da una ayuda. Gracias, muchas gracias para las gentes, para ustedes, para cuantos que mandaron un poquito de dinero para hacer mi casa. Gracias a Dios. Dios que bendiga, sí, gracias a Dios. Gracias por la vida, por mi casita.
Gives you an idea of what some of these people are living in before we go and build these homes that he's going to talk about. And when we talk about our students and stuff, that's the kind of place some of them are living when they're trying to do their homework, which clearly if you do it at night has to be done by candlelight if they don't have electricity and things. And so it gives you an idea of some of the things that they're kind of up against and in their living conditions. As soon as the PowerPoint comes back, we'll get you down there. 7, health and nutrition. Down there. One of the issues we run into is malnutrition, obviously, is rampant. Goes along with the poverty and things. But it's like 80% people are considered malnourished. When it gets to children, it's like 28% are considered severely malnourished. And huge high infant mortality rate and such, especially if they have special needs and things like that. It becomes very, very difficult. Okay. The economy, as I mentioned, is a subsistence agriculture one for a lot of the people. A market culture is kind of trying to reemerge, and it was actually getting better before COVID, and then COVID kind of shut it off for a while. And now it's back where they're trying to sell things in the market, trying to bring animals in to sell them at the market and do work, handwork and stuff that they can sell. But small businesses have a high risk of extortion. Because once again, if you're not educated, you don't know when people are taking advantage of you, and they very often
It's like
get
Honduras.
taken. Yeah. Agriculture, they have corn, beans, squash, avocados, all kinds of very fertile land down there. Yes.
Any tourism in the economy?
Yes, tourism is a big thing, and that's why COVID hit them really bad. The city that we stay in, Chichicastenango, tourism is like their #1 thing, and it just really hurt them when they didn't have the tourists coming through. Once we get up into the areas where we're working, no one's going up there to visit. But in the touristy type areas, yes, it's a huge deal for them. And so these people go down and they'll sell the things they made in the market in Chichi if they can. They also have
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, sorry.
Sheep, goats, pigs, things like that. If they have them, first of all, it's expensive to get started on it, but if they do have them, it's usually to go sell in the market as a way to raise money. Rarely do they have meat themselves at home just because it's such a specialty thing for them. Turkeys.
Pavo.
Yeah, you'll know all about turkeys and ducks and roosters and things if you come on one of our work trips. They're everywhere. Once again, something that they can sell in the market and things like that. They are a real pain in the neck for us when we're down there trying to do any kind of videotaping and stuff. You probably heard them in the background on the video. And we have a funny story. Mike was down there one time and he had to do a board of directors meeting. And so he went up to a high hill and was able to get cell service and called into his meeting. And he had to keep muting it and stuff, because like every 30 seconds, there'd be a rooster or a turkey or something like that. And for years after, all these people at his corporation were like, do you remember that meeting where Mike had all the roosters and stuff? And he couldn't live it down.
Yeah.
That's their traditional Christmas meal was turkey.
Oh, yes. Big deal down there. They have lots of turkeys. Work. This is one of our barriers to the kids being in school, is because since they're living off of the agriculture, they have to have the kids helping to work. So young boys from a young age are expected to either come home rather than going to school, work in the fields. Sometimes they send them into town to shine shoes and things like that, but they're put to work at a very early age. It's not uncommon to see very young kids doing work that would be an adult job in the States, and they are just expected to be part of the family and help the family out. Even worse for girls. By second or third grade, they'll be pulling them out of school again because they want them to come and help clean, take care of the other kids, help with the cooking, various different things, work, weaving and things like that. We'll show in a second. And if a family has to decide, we're going to send one kid to school. Got a boy, I got a girl, they're sending the boy every time. Hand weaving, as I said, if they're not cooking and cleaning, they're doing something with their hands, embroidery, weaving, things like this. They tried to teach me how to do this. It's a lot harder than it looks. It was a big laugh for them when they tried to do it. But they will weave and weave, even if they're standing there talking to you, they'll be weaving, their hands will be going. It'll take them a day to a day and a half to do something about that amount. And after the cost of supplies, they'll make a quarter for it. Puts life in perspective for you. So you have these huge dynamic contrasts. You've got unbelievable poverty and this beautiful country. You've got very fertile soil, but malnutrition sitting over here. This huge chasm between the really, really rich people and the unbelievably poor people, and corruption all over the place, and some of the nicest people you can imagine. And Steve will talk about that as well. Once you get to know the Guatemalan people, just amazingly wonderful people. When we've been down there after we've gotten to know them for a while, they're just laughing and so happy to see you and everything. And I routinely have people come up to me and say, how can they be so happy? To see the way they're living, and they're coming and they're laughing with us and they're encouraging us. And sometimes we'll have the mothers at the home go to the tienda and buy like waters or sodas for the team and bring them back. And the team is like, I can't take these, but we need to, because it's their way of trying to be gracious with us, but it breaks your heart because you're like, they don't have anything and they're bringing stuff for us. But that's very much their culture, their personality. We all know that the answer to a lot of these, clearly you know this as well, is education. You're looking at education correlating with lower crime rates, more civic participation, economic growth all over. So education is great. But what is the situation in Guatemala education-wise? This first slide, if this represents all of the kids in a community, this is actually kids who are all in our program. So our kids don't necessarily fit this, but if this was all in general, kids in a community, they all have to register for school. They have to go through the paperwork, register. But on day one, 10% of them aren't going to show up. The family won't even send them. They'll register them because that's the law, but they won't even send them because they don't see the value of education. It's hard to look long-term. And they also don't want to have them not working for the family. As I said, a lot of them drop out by second, third grade. By the time you get up to sixth grade, you only have 40% that are going on, 39%. Most of them, that's as far as they'll go. For most of their parents, it was only first or second grade. So they're like, geez, if you got up to sixth grade. And their local communities, if they have a school in the local community, it usually only goes up to sixth grade. If you want to go to middle school or high school, you have to get transportation. Once again, something they can't afford. So going on beyond that, you might have 15% that actually make it to high school graduation. They actually had graduations at 6th grade, 9th grade, and then 12th grade, just because it's such a big deal to get to those earlier milestones.
But they don't wear school uniforms.
It's getting, they used to more, and it's getting kind of out, not as much now. And then you have maybe 3% that will attend university. Once again, in the rural areas, almost unheard of.
Yeah.
So when these wonderful people came to Mark Ely back in the early 2000s and said, we want to send some of our kids to school. He was down there on a mission trip, not with Pura Vida, with a different organization. And might actually be Compassion now that I think about it. But he was down there and these people came up to him and said, we've got some kids in Lamoa that want to go on to middle school and we can't afford it. And so he got some of his friends and they started their own little scholarship program with like 3 kids. And those kids did so well. The next year, they're like, we have a couple more kids that want to go. And so he found some more friends. And then that's when he found like St. Luke's and some other churches around Trinity and such that started bringing trips down so that people would come down and see these kids that needed to be sponsored. I'm now happy to say we have 378 kids in our sponsorship program right now, of kids that are going to school because of the support of people that are helping them be in the school system. So it's been a huge thing. We have professional educators who help us down there. The process that they go through, if they want to come, they have to be vetted to make sure it's truly needy family situation and that the parents are on board and the kids are on board. Because we found if just the kid and the mother wants the child to go to school, it's not going to work. You have to have everybody invested together and say, we see the long-term value of this and we want our kids to do it. So they come in and apply. We do take more girls than boys, just because, as I said before, if the parents have to choose, they're going to choose to keep the boy in school. And so we do 60-40 with girls. Once they're chosen in our sponsorship program, we actually go ahead and send them to school. We don't want it to waste anymore. And so we actually have a fund called our Unsponsored Student Fund that pays for them to stay in school until we can find a full-time sponsor for them. And that's a greatly appreciated thing, just because that does help us get these kids in school immediately. But really what we would like to do is get them a full-time sponsor. That involves a $48 a month sponsorship fee that you pay for that. It covers tuition, any kind of supplies they have to do, transportation to get to school if they need it, tutoring. Sometimes it even covers a stipend for the family if it's a problem for them to have the child go to school. It's going to be such a hardship for the family. It might be a little bit to help them that way. But it helps these kids stay in school. This is a sample of a child in Pura Vida. And actually, Michelle is not up for sponsorship because Mike and I sponsor her. But this was the card we got when she started 7th grade. She was one of these Lamoa kids that had to travel to get to middle school. And so we started sponsoring her. She's now in 10th grade, but this gives you an idea of what it's like. We want relationships. Our whole sponsorship program, what's different than others, is we want you to build a relationship with this child. So remember Michelle that we saw a second ago? She's actually the baby in that picture. Because that picture was taken back in the early 2000s when we were sponsoring her older sister, Maria. And we got to know the family. Every time we went down there, we would visit with them and things like that. So we've literally known Michelle since she was a tiny baby. And actually, our daughter's name is Michelle too. I don't think it was necessarily there, but I don't know what she was born when we weren't there at that time. But Michelle is a lovely kid. The family, we've gotten to know them really well. Some of my parents and Mike's parents have sponsored some of the other brothers as well in school. They've become important parts of our lives. We pray for them, they pray for us. It makes for a powerful relationship. A funny story that comes along, when we were down there, this was probably close to Rosa's high school graduation. We were down there.
Much younger.
He said, when we were
We were down there and the brother came running to the work site we were on and said, you gotta come, because the mom had just had a baby 4 days earlier. And so we got to go over. The baby was only 4 days old. Mom was laying on a plywood board, cinder blocks that was based on there, is what her bed was like. She had had the baby in that bed 4 days earlier. And they had not named the baby yet. And I was holding it, so I'm like, what's the baby's name? And they kind of looked around and they went, Miguel. And he was like, oh no, he was so humbled by this. He's like, no, why don't you name him after the father, Ricardo, name him after Ricardo. And they said, okay, Miguel Ricardo. And our son, who was 16 at the time, he kind of turned to us and he said, you know what? You just named that kid Mike Richards. So he literally has a whole Miguel Ricardo down there. But when we've gone back in years since, he's taught him how to do the fist bump and all kinds of things, and it's been fun. But those are the kind of relationships we like you to build with your families when you're down there. This is us at Rosa's graduation. The school even let us give her the diploma when she graduated. Not just me, other people come down to visit their students as well. This is one of ours who comes down real often. But sometimes people can't go down with us. So we have a couple of options. If they have a friend who's coming on the trip, their friend can visit their student. Or if not, we have a program where you write letters 2 or 3 times a year. You can write your student and they write back to you. And you can write back and forth and say, what are you doing in school, and encourage them, and they tell you and ask questions about your family. And we do have translators, so you don't have to worry about Spanish, English. But we want you to build that relationship. We had a time a couple times back, I look at all the letters as part of my job. And we had a lady who received a letter from her student that said, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna let you down. I think I'm gonna fail this class. I don't know what to do. It's just so hard. And the sponsor wrote back to him. I saw the letter she wrote back and she goes, I failed a class once in my life and I had to keep working, and now I'm a teacher. And said, I think it's really important that you just keep trying. I know you can do it. And that child stayed in school for like another 3 or 4 years. They eventually did have to go out to go to work, but they stayed those extra years and got all that extra education because she was writing letters back and forth to that student to constantly encourage them in their work and say, hey, this is going to help you in the long run. So I really like the letter writing. Sometimes they send you pictures and stuff like that, which is really cool. So we have this program where we have parents and grandparents that may have gone through 1st or 2nd grade. And they now have children and grandchildren that are going through high school, even into university. We have some getting their masters right now. So we have other programs too. This is pictures from our milk distribution we do. We do a Christmas milk thing, and actually we have alternative gift cards for Christmas milk. If anyone's interested, I can show you later on. But we raise funds, we go down there and we take powdered milk to these families, because a lot of them obviously don't have refrigeration at all. The cows are they're not given a whole lot of milk. And so this becomes a really big deal for the family to get milk.
We got so lucky, the 2 weeks that we were there, we got to distribute this powdered milk. So the funds are collected all year long, what they call a Christmas fund. And then the distribution happens once a year. We happen to be there during that distribution.
It was pretty exciting
Pretty amazing.
to watch these families, literally, as you saw in that line back there, stood in line for more than an hour out in the hot sun, waiting to get their bag of powdered milk that they have. We obviously have the construction trips, which are fantastic, and Steve's going to talk about those. I'm going to leave time for that. We have an English camp trip that goes down. Once again, this was the teachers coming to us and saying, hey, we need these kids to hear some more English. We're trying to teach them English and they don't hear it enough. We want to have an immersion thing. So they have an immersion camp where we go down and we have people who just go and do a week of speaking English with them, games, songs, things like that. We actually have one coming up in July. And that one is going to have a construction trip portion of it as well, and have spots for that. So anybody that wants to go in July on a mission trip, singing before they leave, like put you into that one. So what are we? We are a 501c3, as he said. We're based here out of Colorado. There's only 4 staff members here stateside, and we have very little physical assets. We work from home. It's all done online, things like that. The address is the Highlands Ranch Post Office because I pick up all of the mail. But we all work here. We have a very strong board, though, a board of directors that supports us in what we're doing. We also have a Guatemalan board of directors, and they are the ones on the ground down there that keep us informed with what's going on, what the needs are. They help vet projects for us and things, so we know where we can have the most impact. The most cool thing, though, what we started doing is we started hiring our kids that have been through our program. So like this is Danilo. Now you probably know Danilo from our work site. He's our kind of supervisor that goes onto the work sites, make sure everything's being built correctly and everything's being ordered and things like that. And he was actually one of our early students in the program. So he's gone through university with
Right
us.
there. He's also a motorcyclist. He has this little Honda. So we kept talking about motorcycles and we swapped tags. So he has my Colorado plate and I've got his Guatemala. If I do any speeding, he's gonna be arrested.
Unfortunately,
He told me the same thing was gonna happen to me. If he gets caught down there, they're coming to the United States.
He's a really cool guy too.
Yeah, he is.
He's a fun guy.
Yeah.
This is Sebastiana, another one of our early students as well. Cool story comes with Sebastiana in that she was in Lamoa, that village that we talked about, that we were in at the first part, and she actually went all the way through university. She was not just the first woman to graduate from university in her town. She was the first person to graduate from university in her village. And so they have involved her now in decision-making, things like that. And she's actually our head of our tutoring program down there and gets out and helps the kids that are struggling. Wonderful, wonderful lady. We're very proud of her. So if you would be interested in joining us on a trip, if you would like to sponsor a kid, I have all kinds of packets back there that you could sponsor them on the spot today if you wanted. I have about 7 kids back there. We also have more online if there's something that you're interested in. I have our newsletter. It was a recent newsletter, and it actually tells the story of one of the students who went through the program and did really, really well. So Jessica was supported by one of the people who went down on one of the early St. Luke's trips. And so it talks all about what they did with her. I do have some of those, as I said, the alternative gift cards. There's one for milk. There's one for that unsponsored student fund. So we have all kinds of ways that we'd love to get you involved, whether it's through milk, sponsorships, trips, things like that. And we absolutely love the trips. And Steve's going to talk to you about what goes on. And I just told him, and he's like, I didn't know that. You're sneaky.
Yeah, you are sneaky. I thought it was just down there for concrete.
Yeah.
You know, and it turns out to be a lot.
Big goal with getting you down there to build a house, to work on an orphanage, to do these various projects they do down there. So we want you to fall in love with people and help support the kids and the education that's going on, because that's, as we said, what's going to really help this country in the long run. So we're doing wonderful, amazing projects that are very meaningful. And at the same time, we're getting to know the people and hopefully keeping these long-term bonds with them and helping them change their communities. So I appreciate the time on that.
You know, the awesome part is that this is a Colorado-based org.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily tied to the Methodist Church, but we have plenty of Methodists that do volunteer their time and money. It's really neat. And we're talking about, you know, a country that's not only impoverished, but is, you know, 2,000 miles away.
Yep.
And to be able to touch that from Highlands Ranch is very special.
St. Luke's is already working on their 2025 trip and finding dates and stuff. So if you're interested in that, we've had St. Andrews people come with us before on our trip. In fact, we had 3 on this last trip. We had St. Andrews people that were there, as well as I actually led a St. Andrews trip one year instead of a St. Luke's trip. So it's a nice connection with the churches and things like that. Yes.
Quick question, do they all dress so colorfully?
Yeah. Honestly, more and more, it's that in the rural areas, you will see the women are still that way. The indigenous women still wear their dresses like that. You have some people in the main towns that will wear it trying to show their indigenous pride, but it's getting more and more Western wear, especially once our kids start getting into high school and university and they're around other kids that don't have the indigenous wear, and you start trying to wear other clothes and things like that. The boys wear more jeans and a top usually. Very often though, when you're out on these work sites, someone will come up to me and go, that kid has a Tommy Hilfiger shirt. How is they doing that? And then the next day you go and they're wearing the same Tommy Hilfiger shirt. And the next day you go back and it's the same. And they're like, never mind. Got it. Figured it out. It's something that was
The
sent down.
white colors are their cultural heritage and
On those,
style.
the dresses that you saw, here's one. On the top of their dresses there, those are all unique to their villages. So you can look at them and tell where they're from based on what the sewing is and where it is.
So they make all their clothes?
Yes. They hand do, yeah.
Just a quickie, this is a tough one to answer, but is the aspiration level to go to America because of the abundance of opportunities here? To what degree to stay in Guatemala and improve Guatemala? How is that?
Yes,
What's
and we've
the-
talked about that. We have had a couple of times where kids have tried to come up and stuff like that. We've had some that have had disastrous type situations with the crossing up here and things. our policy, and it's supported by all of our board down there and things as well, is what I said of, we're trying to educate them so that they can be the changes in their world down there in Guatemala. And we really encourage them, and most of them, we have very few that are trying to come up to the States because they're trying, they'll say in their letters, I want to make a difference in my community. I want to do this for my community. And so we're really encouraging them to do that, not only because of the situation with the safety coming up, the ones we've heard about are sometimes living in horrendous situations up here. And we're like, and then their family is hugely in debt because it'll sometimes, $15,000-$17,000 to get them up there. They don't have that long. And so it's a really sad situation. And so the educators we're working with and things, I think you might have heard him in one of the talks, saying, we want our people educated down here. We want to make Guatemala wonderful. We want our communities to be great and we want them to live here. So that's kind of our policy of how we.
If they go to university, where do they go?
There's different universities. There's some in Guatemala City. There's some in the local, there's some bigger towns around where we are located and things. We had a student that used to drive an hour every morning into university, an hour on the bus coming back and more. So it's a thing where they're really committed to do it.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, my slide presentation is going to overlap a little bit what Laura's been talking about. 3 years ago, I went down there on a construction trip. I was told you're gonna be pouring concrete, you're gonna be mixing concrete, you're gonna be fitting these bricks that are specially made. All the materials are coming out of their country. All of the labor, the project managers, those are Guatemalans. The Americans that go down there with Pura Vida are basically labor. We're free labor. Sometimes we try to accelerate a project at Casita, and sometimes we don't. Just depending on what goes on. But I'll go through a little bit of this will overlap a little bit with her presentation, but then I want to get into the construction and show you actually some of the techniques that we use to build these homes. And I was kind of snookered because I thought this was nothing but a construction mission, and it is so much larger. I totally missed the point. It's about education. So this is Guatemala. Where were we, Laura? We were like here.
Kind of the central area.
Yeah. And so we were in what they call the highlands. Volcanoes all around us. It's really cool. They're puffing. And local water sources were rivers and lakes. And I didn't even go into that about how Pura Vida has learned so many things over the last 20 years on what to do and what not to do to help their civilizations. We took these drinking straws down there so that they could drink from the rivers and lakes and not get horrible indigestion and diarrhea. And the following year we came back and the straws were all found in the cornfields because they didn't have a way to change the filters on the straw. So we've learned a lot from our giving efforts and from our educational efforts to not make it these white Americans are going to come in and save your world, because that's not what this is about at all. Okay. And here again, you can kind of skip over this, but she talked about their language, and it's a Mayan dialect. And some more, we can skip over this as well, because this talks about, and they just elected a new president, and the people that we spoke to are actually very happy about the way that the government is now leaning, because there's so much of an illiteracy rate. You may have remembered this, that on the democracy cards, on the advertisements for the different candidates, they couldn't read them, so they were colored. So you either voted for the blue or the green or the red or the yellow or the green yellow. And then other people that spoke your language would tell you good things or bad things about that color. So you ended up voting for the color and not necessarily the candidate, because you couldn't read their propaganda, which may be good, it may be bad.
That's our kind of.
Yeah. So the mission is to facilitate the sharing of the resources with these communities, being mindful in a very long-term way. Primary focus, I did poke you in here, educational opportunities for these children. She mentioned that one of the things that we do, since we're pulling their student into classrooms, that takes that worker out of the field. It takes that worker, that 10-year-old, out of the cornfield. Some of the the money that we use, we actually buy another laborer to go into the field and take up some of that slack for that youth that is now being educated, which is, I thought was pretty remarkable. And she mentioned that we are a non-government organization. We didn't talk about Mark Ely. Can you tell us about him?
He's the executive director. He's the one who was down there on the mission trip when they first came to him and said, we have these kids that want to go to school. Could you help us out and stuff? And so he started it. He actually ended up a couple of years later marrying the lady that was the translator on his trip. And so now she also works with us with Pura Vida. She's a Guatemalan national.
Is he a Methodist minister or something?
No, he had been working, he was actually in IT before. He had done a lot of work in technology and things, and then he decided he wanted to get into there. And then that's,
Look at there. You know
Yeah.
that lady.
yeah, I know that lady. I recognize her. My background was teaching before, so that's why the kids is kind of my focus to go to.
So this trip that we just took was a partnership with St. Luke's. And if you recognize this woman right here, she was actually one of our students here at St. Andrews. And she's now, is she the senior minister now at St. Luke's?
No, but she's associate.
She's
Pastor.
associate, Liza?
Yeah, Liza.
Liza.
Liza just went on the trip.
She went on the trip with us, amazing. I'm almost like ready to switch my denomination and again, leave St. Andrews to go to St. Louis. You guys were so wonderful. So I talk about the homes. These small casitas are basically $7,500 in materials and labor. And my question was, well, why the labor? I thought us white Americans were going down there to provide all this wonderful labor. No, that we actually hire project managers that are Guatemalans and construction workers that are skilled, unlike most of us in this room that don't know how to handle a trowel or concrete. The casita gets finished whether we're there or not. So the reason that we're there from Pura Vida is actually to build these relationships and to help with the education of these children. The building of the bricks and building of the floors and setting the windows and doors, it's highly needed, definitely, because most of the folks down there are living in corn stalks and wood. But it wasn't really the primary mission, and that's what I got confused about. I was down there for that labor, and as it turns out, it was actually much bigger. So what we do to make, we make all of our own cement, our own concrete. We build a volcano with sand and cement mixed in. We add pebbles or these concrete stones. The water that's being carried up is actually carried up from a river, from a lake. And the children use these pickle barrels. They dip the water out of the lake, they crawl up the hill, and then we use that water to mix the concrete.
Does that mean there's no well adjacent?
Sometimes.
Some places have the ability to access running water. There's a cost involved in that. So once again, it's cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
So you're not digging wells?
We are not at this point. That's not, there's some organizations that are doing that. We're kind of trying to stay in our lane, but it's nice when they have it, obviously. Yeah.
So when we started, like on our first day, we got up there, the footings were already dug and then everything is done manually there. There's very few machines. So back-breaking labor to create the footings and set the first level of the cinder blocks. And then, of course, this is the dirt that was packed in. We'll go further into the. So this is Bob. He's at St. Luke's. His wife is next door. One of the things we do to make the mortar is we actually dig the sand that's around the building where the casita is going to be. It has to be sifted. So he's using a very primitive sifter, and he's smiling like crazy. He really enjoyed this trip, and he did that a lot. And he also made balloons. He builds these like animal balloons. He was constantly entertaining the children. So between the sifting of the sand and the building the balloon, another St. Luke's worker, she's busy looking at the leveling of the blocks. Thank God we had some skilled labor down there that were helping us. And I think his name was Marco, or one of the other project managers would come along and he would tap your bricks to make sure that you were perfectly level, and he would say bueno or no bueno, and that meant you were doing okay or we weren't doing okay. And sometimes he would have to remove the blocks and we'd start over. This is steel rebar in here and these clips to help hold the vertical structure. All of the steel we had to cut by hand. We had these giant scissor looking things that we had to clamp them. All of the hooks that were built. We made all of the hooks out of wire. Like I said, very labor intensive, but because these children, because we were building their homes, they all got involved in that. They all physically got to touch the pieces and parts as much as they wanted to. You can see this kiddo here, he's actually helping, mix some of the concrete. Just absolutely thrilled to be there. Again, mixing up some of the mortar. My favorite part, of course, is the construction, and as it turns out, we fell in love with the families. And the kids here are bowling, Bubbles, what was her name? Sarah was, she absolutely loved those kids, and they spent most of their time of being educated and playing and reading books and coloring. You can see here some more. This is a puppet. This is a big parrot puppet. There were birds everywhere. And so some of the aids that we used to help educate were puppets and lots of drawing, lots of fun. Here again, making the concrete, name?
Sharon.
Sharon Oliver playing with a kid, loving her up. And this just happens naturally. There's the balloons that we were talking about. Bob would make these balloons and he would entertain the kids during their labor breaks.
Cute.
Here again are some of the project managers and construction workers, and he gave me a minute to get a picture of his face. And then a few of the final casita. So this was a dedication that we did. This was really pretty neat. After these buildings are made of nothing but concrete. Even the frames that are around the doors and windows, that's all concrete. There's not a piece of metal or wood inside the structure. The only metal that we have are the rooftops, and they're coordinated, and they're slant roofs. They don't get a lot of rain down there, so we don't have to put, a 30 or 45 degree slant, but about a 10-degree slant. When we welcomed this family into their new casita, we had taken green pine needles from some of the trees that were around there. And we spread these needles all over the floor for the entrance of the home so that they would be welcomed, and then with those orange balloons as well. We Americans are pretty lucky. When we're down there, we get to stay at a really nice hotel. And for every breakfast, they were local products. Guatemalan coffee is amazing. You can buy that here. We had tomatoes, we had different eggs. This was a cheese. We also had different kinds of beans. Beans were served at every meal. And when you see the beans, they're not like what we buy here in cans, but they were kind of like meshed together and made into like a meatloaf. And you're like, I've never seen that before. I don't know if I really want to touch it. But it was really awesome. So we lived very well, but
We go to safe hotels.
I got over that. I got over that fact that we were living in luxury.
Yeah.
Because I knew that we were helping every
Yeah.
single day.
Yeah.
Steve, were the houses dirt floor?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're gonna come in later and they pour foundation. It's kind of done backwards. Like in America, we build our foundations first and we go vertical. There, we built the walls and the footings, and then they come in on the last step and pour the floor, and then also erect the steel roofs.
And how about furniture? Do they have beds and mattresses?
Some
or-
do, mostly they build their own. From the different sticks and different straw that they can find.
What about ovens and?
Oh,
things like
that's
that?
great. So there's another. You're not a plant, are you?
No, I'm
So-
sorry. Living conditions,
Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah, you saw earlier the way that they cook inside of their original huts. And the smoke from those fires, from that solid wood fire, would actually fill the hut, and the kids were getting asthma from having to breathe all that. So another Methodist church has hooked up with Pure Vita, or possibly another org that has built these really high efficient, solid wood burning stoves. And also proper smokestacks, so they're taking the smoke out of the house and sending it outside, so that the kids are living better and breathing better.
We started a couple of years ago. It's $250 to get one of those stoves, and we get donors who do it. And so for pretty much every house we've done for the last probably 5 or 6 years, a stove is part of what comes with it.
in El Salvador, they're using propane stove so that they don't breathe in those fumes that they get, because they still grind corn the traditional way in the volcanic bowls where they grind that and then they breathe it in.
And their agriculture, we talked about how they grow beans and corn. Believe it or not, they also grow a lot of rice, and this was a surprise to me.
Rice.
On the coast, they actually flood some of that agricultural land and grow rice. Bananas, you guys can help any way you can, but buying Guatemala bananas, when you go into King Super and you see all those bananas, look for the ones that have Guatemala labels on. And we talked about the coffee, buy the Guatemala coffee, buy the Guatemalan bananas. Another way to help out.
Well, and I don't want to underestimate the value of the people who go down and do the work trips, because they really do work and they do amazing help with us on the homes and things like that. But we do hope you also fall in love with the country and maybe decide to sponsor a student and help us with education, because that's the long term that we see. These are short-term help, and the long term we see as being education.
We've got 5 minutes left. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to question or comment if you'd like to, without feeling like you're interrupting us. Go ahead, anybody. You got any? If not, I want to ask, who was here that had sent kids to Guatemala? Helen just left, I think.
Yeah, she just
Okay,
left,
okay. She had some connection there. But yeah, has anybody else been to Guatemala here? Eric has. Okay. Did you go on vacation or?
I
Mission
have
trip?
a Spanish teacher who is Guatemalan,
Yeah,
and I went down to stay down there for a couple weeks of their Spanish, so I was pretty much immersed in the culture down there, and I did whatever her family did, and yeah, that was just in April this year.
in April this
Yeah,
year.
and
Oh,
actually she's married to an American, Frank Philippa, who was actually a founder. Well, he helped found a lot of like Mile High Ministries that someone sees here in Denver. But the two of them are coming up for the summer because he needs medical care.
Did you say Frank Tillapa?
Frank Philippa,
Yeah, he was the founder of Bear Valley Baptist.
right.
He wrote a book.
Will be here.
He wrote a book called Unleashing the
Yes,
Church.
he did.
good.
So
Thank you, Ann.
he's married to Dora, but he needs some surgery, so they're coming up at the end of this month.
I went down there in 05, at the same time you
Yep.
you got started. And we visited, I was visiting the sponsored child, but I also did a couple side tours. One of them was to a jade factory where they were cutting jade. And I remember being a little concerned because people that were cutting the jade had no face protection or no eye protection. And they said, and then one of the hotels, and this was in Antigua, they said, oh, this is where Bill Clinton and Hillary came down and stayed here. But Antigua was the original capital. And in 1773, it was destroyed, just destroyed by an earthquake. And that's when the capital moved to Guatemala City.
We also talked about this book. I wish I'd have brought it this morning. It's on toxic charity. So often when we do give money to organizations that we maybe never touch physically, was it 90%, 80%? A huge amount of that money is stolen or misappropriated. It's used in a way that we didn't intend, and we also can hurt those cultures by giving them money and thinking that we're the American savior. And as everybody in this room knows, that doesn't work. So part of this org is to reverse that process. It's to use our money, our resources, our time, our labor, and our love to actually make a cultural difference that doesn't necessarily turn these other countries into Americans.
And with the communities helping to guide the way, so we're doing what they need, not just what we think is.
Very good book.
It's hard to read, yeah. It
So
is,
they
'cause
don't
there's so
always
much
want-
waste.
They don't always want us to go down there and build a community center for them or something that churches traditionally have done. Is that right? Is there a lot of those kind of places that were built that are not used by the locals?
Yeah.
Because it's not their culture?
And that's what we found when we've tried to do things that we just think is a great idea. It's not necessarily what they want. And then it just, as you say, doesn't get used or something like that. Versus when you come down at their request to do things they need, it's much more successful.
I went on a trip, mission trip with the church to South Africa one time. And about midway through the trip, one of the gentlemen took us to lunch in a village, and he sat down and he said, if you spent the money, if you would save the amount of money that you spend sending a group of 10 to 15 people down here, send one of us to you and let us tell you what we need, things will work much better.
Well, I told Steve, we had a gentleman actually from St. Andrews who came on his first trip with us 2 years ago. And the first couple of days, he just kept telling me, we could have just sent the money. There's no reason we're down here. Why are we here? And he goes, we're speeding up the process, but we could have just sent money. And he was working and getting to know the people and becoming part of the culture, starting to do things. And the third day he came up to me, he's like, never mind, got it. I know why I'm here. Fell in love with the people. He now sponsors 3 students. And when he's back here stateside, he's out going to places to talk to them about the work that Pura Vida is doing and trying to promote what we've got going on. Because he's like, I now see, and I'm invested in trying to help back and see what's going on.
Are you getting, you're modeling something very beautiful and very helpful. Did you get the feeling that American diplomacy and our foreign policy is looking to initiatives like what you're doing as far as modeling our behavior as far as foreign policy and expenditures? Do you get any compliments from American government that what you're doing is helping them in their foreign policy as far as modeling?
We haven't been contacted by anybody. But I think if they were to look at it, I think this would be a wonderful model to help down there, because education, in the time that I've been going down there, I have seen incredible turnarounds. I've seen more women being involved in things and being more respected, and, the females in the home getting a little more respected. Now that you've got educated mothers coming in that know what's going on, and it's really helping. That education role is making a huge difference. The health, I think, has improved dramatically since the first time I was down there, because the kids are learning more health things in school and going home and saying, Mom, we need to be looking at this. What about this? And so I think that the education direction is what it's all about.
Sounds like USAID should be involved with you.
I'd send them my way. I'd be happy to talk to them.
Talk about the water, because the water that we use came out of rivers and out of the lakes. They do have tap water in many of the facilities, the hotels and whatnot, but you can't drink the water at all. You get very, very ill. And I think, Lauren even asked one of the families, but you all are drinking this water out of the lake and you're giving it to your infant. And you must have built up some type of an immune system against it. Well, that really isn't the case. They just live with the illness.
We're about out of time, 11:32, so let's wrap up. Any final questions, comments? Anybody on
All
Zoom?
kinds of information back
Okay.
there. If you'd like to look at a packet about a student, or if you want some of our information, I'd be very happy to talk to you about it.
Great. Thank you, Lauren and Steve and Mike. We'll see you next
Thank
week.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Living water.
Thank you. Managing that.